Welcome to Japan Seikatsu. I'm Ian, and today I want to discuss the impact, the lessons learned from nearly a decade of having lived, worked, and studied in Japan. Of course, there are small behavioral changes, for example, taking off your shoes before you come in a building. You start finding yourself bowing even when you're talking on the phone or maybe when you're driving. These sort of behavioral changes I think would make another great video topic. But today I want to discuss the shifts that occurred, at least for me, in mindset. Let's get started. A major shift that I had was my view towards public safety. So, growing up in the US, there was, as there is in all countries, some crime, and you just come to expect this as normal, especially in larger cities. There's a lot of people, and there's just going to be crime. But what shocked me positively about Japan was the incredible low rates of crime. And you start to get used to that. You start to realize that there are alternatives on this planet, that you can have a large city like Tokyo or Osaka that has, relatively very low rates of crime. And you see this at the personal level as well. There are many times I lost my train pass, or other items in Japan, and they were returned to me. And not to say that this doesn't happen in other countries. I lost my credit card one time in the UK. It was returned to me. But the frequency seems to be much higher in Japan. I remember one time I was watching the news, and there was a story on the news, and I think this was national news, about an elderly gentleman who had been caught stealing fish at the supermarket. This is $10-$20 worth of fish. He had been caught. He apologized for doing it. He said that his income didn't allow for him to eat eel, but he really liked it. And, it was just, I remember watching that being like, wow. In where I grew up, somebody stealing an item from the convenience store, a Snickers bar or Milky Way, wouldn't have made news, local news, let alone national news. But in Japan, it's a different universe. And so I have a much deeper appreciation for the importance of public safety and how valuable that is, and just the sense of comfort that, if you have a family member or a friend, a loved one that's walking home from the train station or coming home late at night from work, you don't have to worry to the degree that you do in some other places. So I have a much greater appreciation now, and I thank Japan for that. Another mindset shift for me was tipping. So having grown up in the US, you usually tip 15-20% when you eat out for a meal, but it's not just at restaurants. It can be when you get to a hotel, if somebody helps with the bags, or if you go get a coffee at the coffee shop. It's many different areas, and it seems to be increasing. There is an expectation that you will tip, and I fully appreciate it. I worked at a restaurant. I also worked at an ice cream store. I worked at a coffee shop, and tips were an important source of income. I also was very confident that if you did not tip someone, if we didn't have this tipping system, then the quality of service would decline. It's just logical, right? I mean, the better service that people give, the more they're tipped. There's that incentive there. So when I went to Japan and saw that there was no tipping, and even these restaurants have little teeny buttons that you can push. You push the button, it rings, and then the server comes to your table. But I still saw an extremely high level of service, and there was going to be no increase in this person's hourly wage, and yet it still all worked. It just was my mind was blown, and I realized that you can have a system without tipping and it can still work. And now when I go to restaurants and in the United States, for example, or just traveling in the US, you really feel the onus is put on you. It's almost as if you're now in charge of payroll. How much is this person going to be paid? Why did I all of a sudden assume this responsibility? Isn't that HR, the HR department's responsibility? And also, as I said earlier, I've been outside the U.S. for more than a decade. So when I go back, I'm not always confident about, what types of services do we tip now and what's the appropriate amount. And so you don't want to offend somebody, so it adds all this complexity to the system. And I just like the simple approach of the Japanese system, which is you don't tip, and the wage is covered by the employer. So that is between the employer and the employee, and we really shouldn't be bringing in the customer into this kind of dynamic, I think. So that was another major shift that I had in my view, having lived and worked in Japan. Another major shift in mindset is around the importance of details. Anyone that's worked in Japan, lived in Japan, studied Japanese, worked with Japanese clients can fully appreciate how important details are in Japanese culture, and you can't help but absorb this into your blood. Even studying the language, so you have thousands of these Chinese characters, these kanji that you need to study, and there is a correct stroke order for all of them, and a single stroke could shift the meaning of the kanji completely. So from a young age, you're learning the kanji, you are learning the importance of that stroke order, and I think it's just one example of the importance of details, but that reverberates throughout all of the culture, which is why so many wonderful products produced by Japan. I'm thinking of reliability in terms of cars or cameras or the sophisticated lenses or watches. All of this, or the Shinkansen, the bullet train system, all of this comes down to that importance of details, the focus on details. And if you're operating in that ecosystem, it really raises your focus on details. I think it's the equivalent of playing in the major leagues. If you want to play a sport that is very good with details, well, please go spend some time in Japan, and it will strengthen your focus. A great example is a few years ago, there was a train that was, I think it left too early by 20 seconds. And it was all over the news because the train company actually apologized for this. Now imagine that, apologizing because the train left seconds too early, ahead of schedule. It's incredible. And it's one of the great benefits that Japan gave me, at least, was improving my attention to detail. Another major learning was the importance of listening. So growing up in the US, we are trained, our education system is excellent at giving us opportunities to talk. Be it, when I graduated high school, we had to give a speech in front of the school. I was on the debate club. A lot of your grade is influenced by your class participation. How often are you raising your hand and sharing your 2 cents, which is important. It is very important. But the flip side of that, which isn't really nurtured, is to be a good listener, to be an active listener. And living in Japan, I really started to observe that a lot of miscommunication, especially between Japanese and non-Japanese, was occurring because the non-Japanese wasn't always giving enough time for the Japanese person to respond. In sense, being a good listener, and especially we have to keep in mind that a lot of these conversations are done in English, so it's a foreign language. And anytime somebody's speaking in a foreign language, you need to give them extra time to respond, to formulate their thoughts. And in addition to seeing these miscommunications that often happen as a result of a lack of good listening, I also noticed that the consequences could be quite high. Oftentimes, there was a very important piece of information that an individual really didn't have the opportunity to deliver because they had been cut off or hadn't been given enough time to respond. And if you just think about it, when you are talking, you are just sharing what you already know. You're not learning, right? By definition. So in order to increase the opportunities to learn, we need to listen more. That's where the chance occurs that you're gonna learn a new piece of information. But it also helps individuals clarify their own thoughts. Sometimes asking good questions, open-ended questions, can help somebody refine their thoughts by thinking out loud a bit more. And in Japan, you'll notice with Japanese speakers, there is a longer pause, more silence between person A speaking and person B speaking when compared to the US, for example. With English speakers, it's much more like a machine gun, very little pauses, sometimes no pauses, right? We're speaking over each other. And I think as a result, because we grow up in that culture, we feel less comfortable with silence. And so we want to fill that silence, where with Japanese language speakers, the silence the pauses between two individuals speaking, on average, is longer. And I think the Japanese are more comfortable with that silence. So living in Japan, working with Japanese, you too get more comfortable with that silence. And in that silence, you learn often that there's a lot of wisdom if you're just willing to listen. Another important shift was learning the importance of the other, where in Japan, I think there is more emphasis placed on the other. And I think this goes back to, in the West, the focus more on the individual, which has its positives and is important, of course. But in Japan, maybe Asia more broadly, the focus on the group, which naturally kind of forces you to think outside of yourself a bit more. How will my behavior impact the other? An example would be taking holiday in Japan. So in the West, the idea usually is that you can take holiday, and while you do need to usually ask the company and get permission, you really take holiday when you need to take holiday. Where Japan, before even kind of submitting it in the system stage, you would be checking with your colleagues to make sure, if I take off this week around Christmas in December, do you have any plans? Would the team be able to cover? And, I understand the mindset of, hey, this is my holiday, I'm entitled to my holiday. Yes, of course you are, but we also need to recognize that when we're out of the office, often other people need to do a little bit extra to help fill that gap. And so just being courteous to the other person that's going to be helping you by checking with them to make sure that that would work for their schedule as well. You'll see this often too. If you work in Japan, you go on holiday. When you come back, you usually bring back some souvenirs, some food, some snacks, omiyage, that you would give to your colleagues, which is again, it's kind of an act of gratitude and thanks, letting your colleagues know that you appreciate the fact that you helped fill the void while you were out. You see this all over in Japan. When you, for example, see people coming off of the train, they often will queue, wait for everyone to come off the train, and only then, after everyone's exited, to go on the train. Or you'll see, especially when you're at the international airports, so Narita as an example, usually when Japanese enter the train, they will walk inside of the train to the back of the train to create space so that new people can come onto the train. But if you go to Narita Airport or Haneda, or I'm sure Kix, you'll see a lot of people coming from overseas. They'll kind of crowd into the train and stay there, so that at the next station, people have trouble getting on or getting off, even though there's a lot of empty space if you go back further in the train. And I think it just comes to this wiring, these antennas, this sensitivity that a lot of Japanese have. And those that live in Japan, you can't help but also grow this antenna that, wait a minute, what's the impact of my actions? If I move further down the train, then that makes it easier at the next stop for people to come on. And all of these behaviors in the aggregate contribute to a fairly smooth running society. Trains on time, when people say they're going to do something, they do something, because the partners they rely on also deliver. So it's got all these wonderful positive knock-on effects. Something that changed me after living and working in Japan. The service mindset is incredible in Japan, and it's something that has impacted me for sure. You'll see this everywhere. If you ever go into a store and you purchase something with cash, your cash will be counted in front of you, and it will also be verbalized. And then the change is provided. And the idea here is they're trying to eliminate any possibility of miscommunication. Anytime something's handed to you, it's handed to you with both hands, as if this is, a sacred object, and I am carefully passing it to you. And it's respect to you, and it's also respect for the object. There's so much wisdom in this, but I remember I was on an international flight with an airline, and it was not a Japanese airline, and they were handing out lunch boxes, and the flight attendant literally tossed the lunch box. It was like 1, 2, 3, just tossing them. And it was so jarring to me because I'd been in Japan for so long. You would never see this. It would be carefully placed down in front of you. And for some people, it makes no difference. It's fine, toss me the lunchbox. I got the lunchbox. But I found that I liked that people were giving respect to this item, and I think that helps us feel more gratitude, more appreciation for this object. And so by being cognizant of how you're passing something to an individual as an act of respect, and then also from receiving it, was something that I really liked about what is standard practice in Japan. Another example is I remember getting my car oil changed. I brought my car and I got some minor stuff done, and when I picked it up, the inside had been vacuumed, the dashboard had been cleaned. It just blew my mind that that level of service would be provided. And so it raises your game. It makes you want to try to give more. It makes you want to try to do better. So the service mindset is something that really left an impact on me about Japan. Another learning from Japan is the importance of asking questions. Oftentimes, there'll be somebody that has something to share, but they haven't been provided the opportunity. Or in a conversation, if one person is talking a lot, they may not feel comfortable sharing their view. So taking the time to ask somebody, what are your thoughts on this topic? Or that's an interesting project that you were working on. What were some of the learnings? You can pull out a lot of wisdom and increase, the connectivity in a group or friendship, or this could be a work setting, by asking others what is their view, spending less time sharing what our view is, and spending more time asking for the opinions of others. This is especially true and important when when you're sharing a conversation with somebody in a foreign language. As I said earlier, more time to formulate their thoughts is going to be required. There's going to be more hesitation there. So by asking the right questions can really help pull out more information. It can help improve the communication and also the working relationships. A major life lesson I learned from living in Japan as well but also working for a Japanese company, having many Japanese colleagues, is the importance of slowing down your speech so that you are understood. At my MBA program in Tokyo, we had a lot of classmates from around the world where English was not their native language, but we used English as the language of all of our classes. And so we would call it global English, making sure that you are using vocabulary that's going to be understood, and also making sure that you are effectively communicating. I can't tell you how many times I have seen native English speaker A speaking so quickly, not giving any consideration to the fact that person B is not a native English speaker, and there is no communication going on because this person B isn't understanding what person A is saying. And if you are speaking and not being understood, your message is not getting delivered, then this is a failed operation. There's just no reason for you to even be speaking. And I think this goes beyond the importance of simplifying your message to the core tenets. It could be a presentation, it could be how you speak, is not only true when you're having communication with individuals that don't speak your language natively. I think it's also true when you're having a conversation with somebody who's a native English speaker, or a presentation to native English speakers as well. Hemingway, who is a famous American author, talks about this, about he had a disdain for, he would call $10 words or fancy words. He would complain that some authors force their readers to go to the shelf to get the dictionary to look up what the word meant, and he didn't want to do that. That there are an abundance of great words that are widely understood that can just as well, if not better, deliver the message that he wanted to. So my message here is that this goes beyond just speaking to individuals that are using English as a second language. I think it's got a validity when speaking to people with the native language as well. Slowing down your speech, thinking carefully about the words that you're using so that you're selecting the proper words. You're not wasting words. Oftentimes, if you're speaking very quickly, you're rambling, you're trying to find the right word out loud. So in Japan, when working with Japanese, take your time. Make sure that you're successfully communicating. And I think you'll see there'll be a lot of benefits to that, both in Japan and outside of Japan. Another big learning everyone will have by spending time in Japan or any country outside of your home country is a deeper and more meaningful understanding of your own country. So if you think about a sport that you like, let's say that you really like football, how do you know you like football if you're not familiar with baseball, right? You need something to compare it against in order to really have an opinion about if it's good, if you like it or not. If you've only eaten spaghetti, can you really say that's the best dish if you haven't had, let's say katsukare or sushi or a hamburger before? It's really important to sometimes to learn about our own culture, about our own country, to step outside of it. What I found with the U.S. was there was a lot of things that are very emotionally charged. There's sometimes these divisions between different political sides, and I'm sure that's true in your country as well. And so it's hard to get an objective discussion going because it's so personal, right? It's my uncle is a Republican and my aunt is a Democrat, and my father is a Democrat, and this topic, it's so emotional, it's so political. What was an eye opener for me was when I was getting my MBA in Tokyo, and we had a discussion about healthcare systems. So we studied healthcare systems from around the world, and we discussed it. And there was only one other American in that class. Everybody else was from a different country, and just hearing individuals from outside the US objectively describe the pluses and minuses of the US healthcare system was eye-opening for me. It helped me better understand our healthcare system, the strengths and the weaknesses, and I was better able to absorb it. I was more open to absorbing it because it was coming from an outside, unbiased perspective, and that was really quite eye-opening. And I think that's the benefit that you get when you live in a foreign country, is that deeper understanding of your own country, of where you come from. And it's such a big part of who you are. So in many ways, by living overseas, by living in Japan, you'll more deeply get to learn who you are, get to know yourself at a deeper level. And that leaves, a mindset shift for the rest of your life. It's something that you get to enjoy for the rest of your life. Well, I'm very curious, what is it for you? What has Japan shifted for you in terms of a mindset or opinion or a learning from your time of living in Japan or interacting with Japanese culture? Please be sure to share in the comments section. I'm very interested to hear. As always, thank you for your time, and don't forget to click like and subscribe. Take care.